You're listening to The Debrief with Jared Hudson, a dynamic podcast hosted by retired U.S. Navy SEAL Jared Hudson. Join in as he sits down with captivating guests to dive into a variety of topics, offering insightful conversations, unique perspectives, and invaluable life lessons. From war stories to current events and everything in between, each episode promises to bring truth about the world around us.
Well, Stan, good to see you again, brother.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, man. I know we've, I think, a couple years ago we interviewed when we were kind of doing some political stuff when I was running my race for sheriff here, and we've talked off and on between now and then, and I just thought it'd be great to have you on the podcast so we could talk about some of the things that you're extremely knowledgeable about outside of Alabama political races.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's more to this world than Alabama politics. Alabama politics is very important, and we should be neck deep into it to impact our state in a great way. But yes, there are more things going on in our world that we should be interested in.
No, you're absolutely right. So before we get started with kind of our initial, question and what we're going to talk about in this podcast, real quick, let the listeners know who you are, just kind of a quick up and down bio of Stan Cooke. Yeah, I know you've run for some political offices. You're a pastor. You have multiple degrees, businesses. So just give us a quick rundown.
Pastor, Kimberly Church of God in northern Jefferson County. Grew up in Walker County, a little town called Summerton. Have 6 degrees, 2 bachelor degrees, 2 masters, 2 PhDs. Heavily involved in Republican Party politics, world missions programs around the world. Main focus is in Israel, and we have several programs that are in operation in Israel. I just returned last week from Jerusalem, 5-day program over there, involved not only in the mission aspect of the Israeli people, but in the political realm and what's going on with their government, trying to link people of position and power here in the United States with the proper people in Israel, so their story is adequately told and the truth gets out, and we can get them some help in the long run. They need help in various ways. The world is on fire right now, Jared.
Yeah.
And that's no other way to put it. The world is absolutely on fire. And those fires sometimes are lit from very unusual sources. And people who could help us extinguish those fires, politically, wartime effort, espionage, whatever you want to say, sometimes they're not as helpful as you think they would be. So we're trying to link people together to bring resolutions where they can be brought.
Got you. So, pastor, PhDs, multiple ministries, I guess, or businesses within the ministry that support, in particular, Israel, which brings us to the topic that I really want to discuss, because we went over to Israel to support with some of what they needed. And one of the major concerns that people hit us up about was, hey, Israel, they're their own entity, right? They should be able to fund and take care of stuff on their own. And that just didn't seem to be the case after the October 7th attacks, Hamas coming in, and you see IDF, the military IDF, that were really struggling getting equipment they need. Can you give us a quick rundown on that from what you saw in your previous visit?
Well, we are a very large supporter of Israel, the United States. We contribute a lot of foreign aid to that country. They could not make it without our foreign aid.
The IDF or Israel in general could not make it without our foreign aid.
Israel in general, because they do not have the, let's say, the resources economically, the minerals, whatever it takes to make a country like ours run efficiently. They don't have access to that. So everything that they get, they mine in another country, they buy from another country, or we ship it to them. Israel has money, and they have a lot of money, but the problem that is currently taking place is governments are boycotting them, so they cannot get their ammunition, their weaponry, their supplies, their medications. Everything that we think, well, they've got billions of dollars, they can just go buy it. Well, you can't buy it if people won't sell it to you.
Gotcha.
And this effort since October the 7th has ramped up. Now, before October 7th, there was the Boycott Israel program that's been going on for 10 years. Not only is the Arab League and the Arab nations behind this Boycott Israel movement, but there's a lot of European governments that are behind it. And then, Jared, unfortunately, there are some religious institutions that are behind it because they don't believe within their theological background and their teachings. There are religious institutions that believe that Israel, the Jews, should not be in the Holy Land, that they have no right to that place.
And what religious institutions? You mean like Islamic-based religious institutions or Christian-based?
Christian-based,
okay.
Christian-based institutions that have as a part of their main doctrinal beliefs, their theological background, that the Jews have been relegated to the back seat by God, that Christianity is now in the forefront, and certain Christian religions absolutely believe that Israel has no right being in the Holy Land.
Dang.
And you may say, well, that's just church. Well, it's not, because those people also are a part of our state government. They're part of our military. They're part of our Congress, our Senate. They're governors, they're senators, they're legislators. They work in the CIA, the FBI, the DIA, wherever you want to look at some branch of government that's operating. You have people that bring the religious belief into that job, and no one checks their theology at the door. They may say they do, but they don't.
Right.
And we're seeing the impact of that right now. October 7th should not have happened. But there are those that say that it happened for various reasons within the Israeli government. Israeli government was weakened by their inner turmoil. They're talking about their judicial reform. The country was torn apart by judicial reform for 2 years. They had 5 elections in 2 years. The troops were not as ready as they should have been. People were dismayed. People were becoming dysfunctional in their jobs, either in the workforce or in the military. They let their guard down. And even though intelligence tells us that they did expect some type of an attack, they did not expect Islamic Jihad and Hamas to pull off the atrocities that they did. And we still haven't heard the end of this. This is going to be ongoing. The investigations will eventually reveal who is responsible. But Jared, I will also tell you this, and the listeners that are watching, the viewers that are watching, Benjamin Netanyahu is not at fault. There are forces at work from within the United States and within the European Union that are trying to weaken him. And I will sit here today and tell you that they're trying to overthrow his government.
Oh, wow.
They want a weak, liberal leader as the prime minister of Israel. They want someone who is more socialistic, and they want someone they can control. Netanyahu's outsmarted them many, many times, and I think he'll do it again. Very intelligent man. Genius individual, graduated from MIT, very, very high IQ. He knows the lay of the land. He knows what the enemy is going to do. And he's been telling us for years, we need to take care of Iran. Iran's the enemy. Iran doesn't have to fight you if they can get Islamic Jihad and the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and Hezbollah to fight you.
Right.
And they can step back and let everybody do their dirty work. But that's the mindset of the Iranians. And I want to remind you and your viewers, Iranians are not Arab. They're Persians. And the Persian mindset has always been, I guess in Christian terms, holier than thou, that they're a step above the Arab world. They're a step above the Semitic world. They don't view themselves as Semitic at all. And the Persian people actually look down upon everyone else in the Middle East. They want to control Islam, and there's a struggle there. Their version of Islam against Saudi Arabia's version of Islam.
Right.
They're competing. Who controls the Islamic world? One final thought on this before we go any deeper. Israel has 8 million Jews in the nation of Israel. There are probably 10 million Arabs in the West Bank territories. And in all the other Arab countries surrounding them, there are 40 million Arabs.
Golly.
Yeah, the Jews are outnumbered.
Oh, yeah.
Not only just in manpower, military force, but all the other weaponry that they can bring to the table. And there's some things going on behind the scenes as we sit here today that will make the news eventually in the future. But the world is not anticipating, and I will say the United States has been betrayed, and so has Israel. And war is at the doorstep, closer than we think.
When you say, like you said, well, we don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole and get back onto, this is the topic, but get back onto more of a generalized topic. But when you say the U.S. has been betrayed and Israel has been betrayed, can you say a little bit of what you mean by that?
Yes. Israel has a peace treaty with Egypt, and they have economically good relations. But over the last 3 years, Egypt has become financially destitute. They're broke. They've spent every dime that the Arab League has given to them, that the United States has given to them. The trade has become imbalanced between Israel and Egypt. And in the entire time that Egypt has been fighting for survival economically, we've recently learned that the Chinese government has been going into Egypt and gifting to them the best aircraft, the best weapons, the best ammunition, everything that they need to replace their arsenal in Egypt. And all of that is being mounted on the Israeli border at the Sinai.
Currently, as we speak, like it's happening right now.
When Israel went into Khan Yunis, they went into Gaza City, in these schools and these hospitals where they're saying the Israeli army has no right to be, where they're killing hundreds and hundreds of militants. And what are they finding? Are they finding Russian AK-47s? No. They're finding the highest quality grade of Chinese weapons ever made inside of Gaza. So China is working with Egypt to potentially launch a war against Israel. No one has seen this coming. And I will say, as we're sitting here today, it's never been on the news. And no one is talking about it.
Yeah, I've never heard about it on the news.
And another thing that the Egyptians are doing that's really hurting the cause, it was on the news probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, that they were going to help Israel by building a wall across the border about 5 miles away from the Gaza-Egyptian border. We will build this wall just in case the people of Gaza broke through the Rafah gate and fled into Egypt. But the truth of the matter is they built that wall intentionally over the ventilation air ducts of the tunnels that are being dug from Egypt into Gaza. And Egypt all along has been delivering weapons and food and medication.
And these are part of the tunnels that the Israelis, at least when I was there, the IDF, were having to clear. They're having to figure out ways to route out the Hamas fighters that were in the tunnels, the captured people in the tunnels. So this is part of that same system that they've been dealing with over the last, 6 or 7 months now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the tunnels do not stop at the Gaza-Egypt border. They run 20 miles into Egypt.
Oh, wow.
You can have a 2-lane highway in some of these tunnels, and they're funneling supplies back and forth. So this is going to be a much larger war, and I think that they're planning for the right time to attack Israel. As soon as Israel draws to the north and they start fighting Hezbollah,
up on the Lebanese border, up near Lebanon, and all of this on the opposite end, Egypt's going to be set.
They're going to be set to come back to the south.
Gotcha.
So the Israeli people are very nervous. They're timid. They're on edge. Last week, I felt sorry for them just to see the look and the expressions on their face. They don't know what's coming next.
Right.
And they thought they could count on the United States. Well, they can count on the evangelical church. I believe the majority of the Christian church in America is behind them. I do not believe this administration, the Biden administration, is behind them at all. And we need to actually leave them alone, let them fight their own battle. One of my good friends in Israel the other day said, they're always telling us ceasefire. We want a ceasefire. He said, name me one American politician that has told the Ukrainians consider a ceasefire.
Yeah, none of them. All they've done is continue to fight.
Yeah, that's all they want.
Yeah.
That's all they want.
Yep. No, that's very interesting. So back to kind of what we're doing, how this impacts us nationally. For the evangelicals that listen to us, or the people who might not be evangelicals that might say, okay, yeah, we're all for supporting Israel, right? But why do we need to support Israel? How does that impact us in the U.S.? How does that impact me as an Alabamian? Or for those who might just say, no, we don't need to support Israel at all. What does that look like? Because you just said something very interesting. Part of what we need to do is not so much go over there and fight a war for them and have our boys on the ground. It's just to leave them alone and let them fight the war that they know how to fight. So maybe expound on that a little bit.
Well, I think the Christian community needs to seek out organizations that are providing aid and assistance to the Israeli people and to the Israeli military, and let's just be honest, bypass the American government. There is more American people on the ground in Israel than ever before, rebuilding homes, rebuilding farms, taking all type of supplies. Also, I think we need to listen to the Israelis. We've got a major problem coming from the West Bank, the Gaza Strip. And if I could go down this story with you very quickly, I don't think our American politicians are listening, and I'm doing my best to sound the alarm, and many other people are as well. Christians, by their very nature, the goodness of our heart, the innocence that we see or that we want to see in redeemed people, our very cause of saving the lost, reaching those in darkness and bringing them into the light of Jesus Christ. It helps us to stay focused on the Great Commission, but we need to understand that we have an enemy that could care less about the Great Commission, and they will use our good nature against us. For example, we exposed 12 or 13 American religious-based institutions operating in Bethlehem, the Gaza Strip, and in the West Bank, communities like Jenin, Nablus, Ramallah. And these institutions are doing great work. They're providing clinics, health clinics for women and children, providing American-based, American-styled education programs. And who wouldn't want that? And through those opportunities, they're getting to teach the Bible, and I commend them. They actually get to use the Bible as a textbook. Tell me one American school in this country that gets to use the Bible.
Yeah,
as a
exactly,
textbook.
right.
So they're doing this great work, but we noticed a problem about 6 years ago when a young Arab man or girl, a teenager, would receive Christ as their Lord and Savior at one of these institutions. Their family would disown them. They would kill them, or they would draw
The Arab family, the Arab child, the Arab family would disown them. Okay.
And thank you. I need to clarify that. The Arab Muslim world, if their children came back home from one of these American-based Christian institutions and said, we've received Christ, then that Arab Muslim family would either kill their children or they would drop them off out of the West Bank and leave them to fend for themselves, have a mock funeral for them as if they had died. And then about 6 years ago, we noticed that stopped happening, and we became very suspicious. And we started working with law enforcement and intelligence services in this country, and we discovered that what was going on was the Arab Muslims, had figured the system out, let their little son or daughter receive Christ, but it was all a facade. And then when they became 18 or 19 and graduated the program, they are applying for asylum in the United States to come to an American university. particularly a Christian university, and they would get sponsorship from that religious institution. So religious denomination X sponsors an Arab young man out of Bethlehem, and he comes to the United States, let's say to Florida, to a religious college, and he's there 2 to 3 weeks, and he disappears, never to be seen again. And then within a matter of time, he shows up as a part of a Islamic-based terrorist cell group.
Here in the U.S.
Here in the United States.
Legally here in the U.S.
Legally here because we sponsored him, we brought him here, or her. And I can tell you without hesitation that there are many of those in Birmingham, Alabama today.
Oh, wow.
They came here under that guise, under that pretense, and they're a part of a network here today.
Wow. So, in a nutshell, and I know my dad's like using this for, is Christians oftentimes we let our kindness become a vice. And this would be an ultimate vice if we're sponsoring terrorists to come into the U.S. through the kindness or the goodness of the Christian heart. So it's not that every organization that brings somebody in has nefarious intent.
No.
For all intents and purposes, they probably don't have any nefarious intent. They're just foolish about how they do it. Kind of like Scripture, be as innocent as doves, as wise as serpents, right? Or maybe it's the other way, wise as serpents, but innocent as doves. We're only holding to that innocence, and there is no wisdom in that, at least as it revolves around the Arab Christian community and how they impact Israel, and then ultimately how they impact the United States. Is that a fair
Yeah, it's a very good assessment.
Okay.
And we need to be wiser about how we handle things.
Right.
Now, setting that aside, the American church needs to understand not only are we being played and used, but we need to be proactive from now on and I guess teach our missionaries overseas what they can and cannot do and what they should be leery of. But we're also working on the other end of the spectrum. We're asking the Israeli government to review their visa program and to scrutinize these individuals very carefully. So at some point, maybe the State Department, if it ever gets cleaned up, the State Department here in the United States and the Israeli government will get together and come up with a better screening program for visas and looking at the potential of stopping these terrorist cell groups. I'm no longer concerned about how many people are coming across the border being a terrorist.
The open border is not, in your opinion, it's a problem, but it's not the problem. The problem's already here.
The problem's already here. And I'll give you a good example. Years ago, we were allowing Iranians, some people say Iranians, it doesn't matter, but we were allowing them to come to the United States because the Ayatollahs were bad and they're persecuting the average Iranian citizen, maybe not very religious. They want a greater quality of life. They're persecuting them. And we opened the floodgates for Iranian citizens to leave Iran to come to the United States.
Because they're a persecuted people.
They're a persecuted people. Yeah. And our government let them come. And when that happened, they let in many terrorists. So you have this first generation family comes in, and then they have children, and their children are going to Harvard and Yale and MIT and Caltech and Stanford, and they're getting their degrees, and they're getting plugged into the American system, and they're Americanized, and they are truly American citizens now, but they're still a part of that terrorist cell group, and they're waiting for their cue. They're waiting for their signal when to act.
Do you believe that is why, and I believe with this segment, this is a good place to wrap it in because of everything you've given us generally and then tying it to this. Do you believe that is why we see in the Ivy League schools, and at least in the news at a lot of these Ivy League schools, such an anti-Semitic response? You know, you got a lot of people that are anti-Israel, anti-Jew, pro-Palestinian. Do you believe that's the reason why, or is that just a part of the reason? That, you know, the simple fact that we've had that already going on here for the last 20 or 30 years?
I think it's threefold. Number one, I think it's religious-based. Harvard was the first American Christian college in the United States in the 1600s. Once conservative, now extremely liberal. So just who they are allows anti-Semitism to exist on campus. Secondly, I think you have professors and deans, provosts all throughout that system, or the Ivy League schools, who are being paid. They're being paid by foreign entities to be anti-Semitic because it helps the cause of war.
Like what possible foreign entity, if you don't mind me just asking a quick example of one that you might know of?
Well, you
like
might
governments or organizations?
Okay, I would say let's stick more with organizations, but people more like George Soros or his son, or you've got people within the British network of families that's infiltrated, and they're part of the British government, but they're very anti-Semitic. England is extremely anti-Semitic across the board, especially Ireland, the Irish government. So if they can infiltrate American colleges and universities and get these 18 to 24-year-old students with an anti-Semitism background and mindset, they're going to be the future of politics. Mm-hmm. They're going to be the future of big business, corporate America, Wall Street. And they have a long-term plan, Jared.
Yeah.
We Americans have a problem. We've got a microwave mentality that we want it today, we got to have it today. Mm-hmm. But these people are in it for the long haul, and they'll pick away at this person by person, state by state, college by college. So I think there's outside money coming into this country, major endowments at these universities, and some of that money goes to anti-Semitism, goes to their programs. And then I think you have the terrorists that are on campus. They look like, college Joe Cool, going to school every day. They blend, they mix in with the regular college campus crowd, but they are a part of a terrorist cell group, and they're there for a reason.
Dang. All right. So sorry to sidebar you on that, but that's a great answer, because that definitely answers at least questions that I know a lot of people have asked me, and that is why all of a sudden all of this, pro-Palestinian, anti-Jewish rhetoric across the board of these campuses, and that's as good an answer as any. And like I tell everybody, take it with a grain of salt, but it gives you something to research on your own as opposed to going from nowhere to something. At least now you have something to look at, for lack of a better word. So back into how this impacts the United States. The open border is a problem, but you believe the problem's already here, it already exists. How does what's going on with Israel, and to go back to what you said at the beginning, how does what's going on with Israel and the, what's the exact word that you used? And it started with Egypt. You used a good terminology. We've been deceived. We've been tricked. Yeah, we've been deceived. We've been, sold hook, line, and sinker on one thing when in reality another thing's happening. How does that impact our everyday lives here in Europe, in your opinion?
Well, I believe it draws our attention away from the political problems we have at home. And it's making us pick sides politically that we normally wouldn't choose. We're listening to messages, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, about Israel. And I will tell you that just watching the news, I have not heard anything that is true that's going on in Israel. Everything's twisted, contorted, it's lies.
Based on what you know from the ground.
From the ground up. It is nowhere close to being true. I'm very concerned that we're going to vote politically this coming November based on things that are being ginned up in this country when a much larger enemy is at stake. Yes, they're behind election interference. Is there truly election interference? Yes, there is. But it was created by the very same people who are anti-Semitic. So there's an overall large problem that we have within American politics. And we've got to get back to true conservatism, the Constitution. It is a self-healing document if we will just follow it. And we've got to elect men and women who really believe in constitutional conservatism and then pray to God they're a Christian. But if we could get all three in one person, that's fantastic.
That'd be great, yeah.
But we've got to have some constitutional conservatives that look at this nation through that lens, and then everything else becomes important. I'm concerned about the crowd that says we don't need to be involved in foreign wars. And I'm going to tell you today that we are the police force of the world. And if it wasn't for the United States, this world would already be devastated with nuclear war, with disease, biological warfare. If it wasn't for the United States, we would already be in World War III. We're the only thing that stands in the way of that war. And I know people don't want to hear that, especially on the Republican conservative side. They think that's a liberal agenda. No, it's not. The reality is that you and I know today that we have troops all around the world fighting secret battles that will never make the news, great men and women laying down their lives on every continent of this globe, fighting this secret war to keep us safe here at home so that you and I can do what we're doing today.
That's right. No, you're exactly right. And what I'd like to do on we'll take a break and come back, and I would like to start talking about maybe some of U.S. involvement as we can, which you've seen on the private side, and what that looks like on the ground. I know as a military man, a guy who's worked for Special Operations community for a long time, but I'd like to hear from you from the private side, what you've seen and the contacts that you have, and the gap that's between the politician in D.C. and the guy on the ground, and maybe the bureaucracy in the middle that might change what is presented to either of those individuals.
Okay, we can do that.
All right. Thanks, brother.
This episode is sponsored by Covenant Rescue Group. Covenant Rescue Group is a nonprofit organization that combats human trafficking and child exploitation. They support operations globally leading to real rescues, real arrests, and real prosecutions. Foundational to this is funding the operations from the training to the rescue. They join their team with other organizations and law enforcement agencies providing resources and manpower needed to conduct successful anti-human trafficking operations. This includes undercover child exploitation stings and rescue operations that dynamically break up human trafficking rings. Visit www.covenantrescue.org to learn more and donate.
Well, Stan, good to see you again. I know we broke away a little bit, but we'll come back and try to knock this interview out.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, and there's been a lot happened since we cut away. It seems like the Lord sovereignly worked this out, to where maybe we didn't talk about everything we was going to talk about, because literally 2 days later, the world started becoming an even crazier place than it already was.
Yeah, it did. And I do believe that there was some gamesmanship going on by the Iranians. We had talked off screen that they were going to launch an attack. Didn't know to the extreme of what they would do. But Israel, no matter if the attack was planned, if it was telegraphed, if that attack was using their lesser weapons, getting rid of junk inventory, whatever you want to say happened, no rocket exploded on Israel territory by a direct hit. One was knocked out of the sky and hit one of their Air Force bases in southern Israel. But even that rocket was intercepted. It just fell and missed the target it was supposed to go to. So, about 99.9% of their missiles and their drones were all knocked out of the sky. But they're reloading.
Oh, yeah.
Iran is reloading. And Netanyahu's backed in a corner, and they are going to strike back. Now, strategically, they will do more than just go after missile launchers. They're going to go after leadership homes. They'll go after the Houthi. They'll go after Damascus. They're going to go after Aleppo. They're going to go after places in Iraq where Iranians have missile bases or have military stationed there. So Israel's not just going to attack, let's say, the nuclear power system that's being developed in.
It's going to be full scale, real military targets, real military action.
Multifaceted, and it will take place over days. They won't do like Iran's attack was like made for television production, and that's insane. You don't fight a war that way.
Yeah.
And give your enemy 4 and 6 hours knowing that the missiles are coming. That's just totally insane. Israel doesn't operate that way. So don't be surprised if you don't see assassinations on the street, maybe Mossad agents driving motorcycles, killing their scientists on the side of the road, different things happening that way. You'll see it over a period of time, but there will be one major attack. That is coming.
Well, so I don't want to cut us off there because we're really getting into it, and we're going to get back onto that. I definitely want to get onto the Houthis and what we've seen them do with some of the vessel boarding stuff, some of the ship takedowns they've done. As a SEAL, I thoroughly appreciate the quality of what they do and how well they are at vessel takedowns. But I do want to talk about that and kind of what it looks like, because it does seem that they've had a lot of work and a lot of training to get to the point that they're at, to be able to do the successful vessel boarding and takedowns that they've done. And we know obviously they're tied to the Iranians and they're working closely with them.
Right.
But we'll get into that in a minute. What I'd like to do is to have you recap really quick what we spoke of a few days ago before the attack. We're kind of doing our 30,000-foot interview of what's going on in Israel, how it impacts the world, and maybe even get into how we've been deceived as the U.S. or kind of the ploy that's been put out to Israel and the U.S. and the deception that's taken place, not just worldwide, but in particular with what's going on in Egypt as well, because that's kind of where we finished off on that day. So could you give us that rundown really quick on what we've already talked about, and then how Egypt is involved?
Okay. Well, we're told in the news that we have peace treaties. Israel and the United States worked on the Abraham Accords to be at peace with Jordan, which we already had a treaty with them. Excuse me. They have a treaty with Egypt, and no one would expect Egypt to even be an enemy of Israel at this point. There's the appearance of cooperation, collaborating on a military effort, diplomatic efforts. The Saudi Arabians, irregardless of what they say on the news today, they were playing a vital role in knocking down some of the ICBMs and some of the drones that were coming out of Iran.
Yeah.
The Saudis really helped.
Now, and I don't want to segue into this, but I do know that when October 7th happened, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is kind of a statement and a question all in one.
Okay.
The following week, before October 7th happened, there was a deal that the U.S. was making with some other countries and the Saudis, and because the Saudis were upset at the deal years ago, 10 years ago, I guess, that the Obama administration had made with the Iranians. They said, hey, the Iranians are as likely to shoot us with a nuclear weapon as they are to shoot the Israelis or anybody else. We would also like the ability to develop nuclear warfare capabilities. And so it was those talks and that process that possibly was used to get the October 7th kicked off maybe sooner than what they had planned. Is that an accurate assessment? I've heard that in media. I've heard other people talk about it, but now I'm kind of, that's what I heard. Does that sound true, or does that hold true to what you know?
Yes, it holds true, and there's a little bit deeper in the woods we need to go with that.
Okay.
Okay. The Saudis are the caretakers of Mecca and Medina. They are the home country of Islam. They don't even like the fact that there is the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, where Muslims feel the need to go worship Allah there. They want everyone coming to Saudi Arabia. The Iranians are Persians. Mm-hmm. They are not Arabs. They are a very arrogant, egotistical people who feel like they want to be the caretakers of all of Islam. There's a cult inside of Iran that worships this 12th Imam, this Mahdi, this Messiah figure. He is very cultish. And Ahmadinejad used to be one of the people who believed in that greatly. A young Ahmadinejad was one of the people who captured our people under Jimmy Carter, under the Ayatollahs. He was a part of that plan. They actually believe if they start a war and put this world on fire, that will cause their Messiah to come and obliterate all the unbelievers. Now, the Saudis are not that way. Now, they have a very extreme form of Islam, and I don't agree with it at all, but they want to be the caretakers of everything Muslim. So that's the struggle between the Saudis and the Iranians. So when we started placating the Iranians and giving them billions of dollars and dropping all the sanctions against them, the Saudis felt deserted. You know, they are a partner with us in many different things that people wouldn't realize. Let me rabbit trail a story for you real quick to show you how the world really works. The average viewer, this is going to blow their mind. They think that the Saudis and the Israelis are mortal enemies. And the people, the street people, the people in the common jobs of Saudi Arabia or in Israel, they probably do hate each other. They're afraid of each other. But at the higher levels of government, Israel ships minerals and chemicals and products on trains to Saudi Arabia so that they can distill their oil and make other oil byproducts that they need to sell to the world. But how do they do that? You know, there's no trains going over that says product of Israel. There's nothing like that, so they disguise it. Their fruits, their vegetables, their minerals, their Dead Sea products that Saudi Arabia desperately needs is sent over on trains and ships that says product of Italy, product of South Korea. So when the people see the trains coming through Saudi Arabia, they see it in Arabic, and they see it in Korean, and they see it in English, product of South Korea. So the common man on the street thinks this is not coming from Israel. This is coming from South Korea. But the truth is the Israelis and the Saudis are working together, and they have been doing this for 30 years.
They've got a good relationship, maybe even a great relationship.
A great relationship. So the higher up the echelon of leadership you go, the more cooperation you have.
Gotcha.
The same thing goes on with Jordan. The same thing was going on with Egypt, but things are about to change with Egypt. It's getting very serious, and the Israelis are preparing for war in the south with Egypt.
Well, that also,
the tide has turned.
Will that also impact the relationship with the Jordanians? Like, I've worked with the Jordanians and in Jordan, and we would also work with the Israelis kind of around the same time, right?
Yes.
There was a good relationship with the Jordanians and the Israelis, and King Abdullah's wife, I believe, was Jewish. Is that right? Or
No,
she's
she's
Palestinian? Okay, all right, yeah. But he was very much into the Jewish people, I guess, if that makes sense, when we met with him. And again, maybe that's a show, I don't know. But I know working with the Jordanians, I definitely saw that. They were very much friends of Israel, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, King Abdullah would not be in power if it wasn't for Mossad and Shin Bet protecting him and American forces being on the ground in the country of Jordan. We are there. We have a force there, and it's more than just more than just 100 men. We have a large force there. Matter of fact, we have a base somewhere in Jordan that we operate from. We have a base in Israel that we operate from. It's tucked away. It's hidden away. But the Jordanians need us, and we need the Jordanians. We say Israel is the tip of the spear. That's not true. Jordan is the tip of the spear. You do not want Iran or any Syrian faction or any Muslim extremist to take over the country of Jordan, because then the discussion about a two-state solution is gone. you have the enemy on your border then. Missiles just right across the Jordan River, pointed at Jerusalem, at Tel Aviv, at Beersheba, at Bethlehem. You're right there. And with a launch of one missile, 60 seconds, it's gone. So
the relationship with the Jordanians is extremely, or the continued relationship with the Jordanians is extremely valuable.
It's extremely valuable.
And is that a fragile relationship now with what's going on with Egypt, or is that relationship still pretty solid before we get into Egypt?
Are you saying the Jordanian relationship with Egypt?
The Jordanian relationship with Israel and the U.S., is it still relatively strong?
Oh, it's very good. It's very strong.
So what's happening in Egypt is not negatively impacting that relationship yet, at least.
Completely different mindset, different group of people, different group of power structure. Jordan needs us. We need them. Mm-hmm. We need access to their land. And there's some infrastructure things later on that we could do with Jordan to really make them more secure. But the Jordanian people are great people. Let me segue and just tell you a quick story about the Jordanians and the Israelis that will let you know the true nature of those people. You're always going to have extremists on both sides, but they are not the major part of the equation. 3 years ago, we were in Israel, just outside of Jericho, and we'd taken probably 25 leaders in American government on a tour to Israel. We wind up at the Jordan River, the traditional site of where Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. So all of these guys want to be baptized. And so sure, we'll take you down there. So made special arrangements. It's interesting, Jared, the path that we have to take takes you through the middle of a minefield from the 73 and the 67 war. So this road has been cleared through a minefield, and they're still clearing mines today. So we take these guys on a bus, we get them down to the Jordan River. There's a place that they can change their clothes, and we're going to baptize all these men in the Jordan River. And we see these Jordanian soldiers on the other side, and they're doing their duty. They had no food, they had no water, and they absolutely looked like they were exhausted. And they're in the hot sun. They didn't even have a pavilion for shade. Now, the Jewish soldiers behind us, they're in the shade. And they see that these Jordanians are hungry and thirsty and hot. So they yell across the river at each other. Now, we're talking the river's probably 12 feet wide at this point, probably 5 feet deep. The current's not that fast where we were. So the Israelis are speaking to them in Arabic, and they're saying, hey, what they're asking is, do you want food? Do you need water? Now, people would think these are mortal enemies. And the Israeli soldiers lay down their weapons, and they go get them Cokes, Sprite, bottles of water, sandwiches, potato chips, food, and they go across the river. They both lay down their weapons, and they feed them. That's the real Middle East. That's the real relationship between Israel and Jordan. Mm. And those soldiers respect one another. They care for each other. And I watched Israeli soldiers feed the Jordanians that had no food, had no water, exhausted. And they were so appreciative. And yeah, were they hugging? They sure were. Did they salute? They absolutely did. And then they went back and did their job. That's the world that CNN does not show you. That's the world that Fox News does not show you. But that's the real world.
Oh, okay. So that's very interesting. So we have a good relationship still with Jordan that's been there for, however many years, that relationship still exists. But with Egypt now, and that's what we finished talking about last time, we've got a kind of a recap of what we covered last time. But with Egypt, what do we have going on there?
Okay. Very serious. Things have changed. The tide has turned.
I'm sorry to stop you. When you say things have changed and tide has turned, can you tell us what they've changed from first?
Yeah, let's walk through this. Okay, we had a very good relationship with Anwar Sadat. They signed the peace treaty with Israel years ago with Menachem Begin. which led to his assassination. Whether they want to admit it or not, elements within the United States government brought to power Hosni Mubarak. Mubarak was our man in Egypt.
And what year was that?
We're talking in the 70s.
Okay, so this was 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
In the 70s. So we bring him into power. We bring his regime into power. We're financing them. We're funneling weapons to them. We're training them. We have our experts on the ground on how to use their weapons, tactics, only with respect of you have peace with Israel. You've got to have peace with Israel. And that was the promise, that was the covenant, that was the contract, that was the treaty. And that treaty is still in existence today, but the Egyptians are now betraying that treaty. What has recently come to light is this. Mubarak goes out of power, and again, elements within our government raise up a man, Sisi, to be the leader of Egypt. And he can be bought. You know, most men have a price, some don't. If you have a great relationship with God and good ethics and morals, you don't have a price. But this man can be bought. So we've funneled billions of dollars into Egypt. So has the European Union, and so has the Arab League. And there's no reason why Egypt should be broke or be destitute or be starving, but they are. And it's because these corrupt leaders in Egypt are pocketing the money, and they're getting ready to leave to go to Morocco and France and Germany and go hide and live a very wealthy, prominent life somewhere else.
And all of those billions of dollars that are funneled by all of these different entities are being funneled in with a different angle or with a different end agenda. Is that an accurate assessment, or do they might all have the same agenda?
I think everybody has the same agenda. We pay you money, you do what we say.
Well, right, but I guess I'm saying the United States will want something different than the European Union, than the Arabs, or
Yes.
okay, yeah.
And, there's products, there's commodities we all want from Egypt. We want first dibs on the cotton. We want any other product that they ship out.
So it might not all be nefarious. It might just be to keep an open economic relationship with, or a
Absolutely.
better one than maybe other countries have.
And the major thing is keep the Suez Canal open and give us priority when we want to ship our Navy through the canal or some of our cargo ships. We want first dibs on who gets passage through the Suez. So you're buying favors. But what recently changed, and I'll give you the proof in a minute, what recently changed is Egypt has become corrupted. They're bankrupt, and their military weapons are not being kept up to standard. And lo and behold, the Chinese government says, we'll help you. And we're going to help you upgrade your military capability. Well, why do they need to be upgraded unless they're planning for war? And the only person they want to go to war with is Israel. They have Libya as a neighbor to the west, and they're doing nothing with the rebels who are controlling the nation of Libya right now. So the Chinese are coming in, providing them top-level aircraft, helicopters, heavy artillery, rifles, machine guns, ammunition, armored vehicles, all Chinese-made, flooding into this country. They also are giving them the money to build tunnels from various locations beyond the Rafah Gate in Gaza into Egypt. So the Egyptians are funneling them Chinese-made weapons into Gaza. Recently, when the Israeli troops went into Gaza City, they went into Khan's Yunis, they invaded schools, they invaded a mosque, they invaded 2 hospitals, killed thousands of terrorists in the process. It wasn't Russian AK-47 rifles that they were picking up.
Those
It was
Chinese stamps, yeah.
Rifles, Chinese ammunition, Chinese belts of 50 caliber and other caliber ammunition. Everything was Chinese made. So now we know that the Egyptians are funneling through tunnels medication, ammunition, and food. And the question that I'm raising, and I raised today in a special meeting that we had, is why in the world are we sending food to Gaza when the Egyptians are sending food to Gaza through these tunnels underground? And another thing was brought up in my recent trip to Israel. And it's national news. This is not anything that can be obscured or say this is not true. This is true. Egypt made it very well known, but it was too obvious, that they have built a wall so many miles away from the Rafah Gate in case the Rafah Gate is stormed by the Palestinians and torn down, or the Israelis
trying to enter into Egypt.
Yeah, flee into Egypt. Or if Israel accidentally bombs the gate or intentionally bombs the gate so the Palestinians will flee into Egypt, the Egyptians have built this tremendously large, thick wall to build a barrier so that they can come no further. But the reality is they built that wall over tunnel entrances and ventilation shafts so the world could not find out what they did. They tried to hide the tunnel entrances.
So this wall is not necessarily at the Rafah Gate. It's deeper into Egypt.
It's deeper into Egypt. And the community on the Egyptian side is actually called Rafah. And that's why it's called the Rafah Gate. It's not that the community in Gaza was called Rafah first. They both adopted the same name. But then we find out that there are marketplaces, places of commerce and trade and business in Egypt, not too far from Gaza, that there are tunnels underground, large enough for a 2-lane highway, that pickup trucks can travel underground all day, and they go under the Rafah Gate, they go into Gaza, and they're delivering them aid and ammunition. So the question is, why are the Israelis being deceived or tricked, or why are we being tricked into sending so many tons of food when the Chinese are paying the Egyptians to do the same thing? And the reality is, Israel today, privately, secretly, is preparing for war with Egypt. Is this biblical? It absolutely is. If you want to find a war plan in Scripture, it's all throughout the Old Testament. Egypt will be a part of this end-time war that's coming. The battle plan is all throughout the Bible. Everything that you and I have witnessed on the news, I can give you a chapter and a verse for it. But if we leave the theology aside, we have a political problem in this country that is allowing this to happen.
And what is that? What is that political problem?
That political problem is a very weak Biden administration. People who are in the Biden administration who is benefiting financially from financing not only a war in Israel, but a war in Ukraine and some other private wars that are going on that we can't talk about, but we know that are taking place. But I'll give you a good example. We've heard Hunter Biden for years was taking money from the Ukrainians. Well, where was that money coming from? It was coming from the United States. So we wash our money, we send it, and there's some congressmen that are involved in this. We send this money by congressional vote to the Ukrainians, billions and billions of dollars, and it gets washed through their banks, it gets washed through their NGOs, it gets washed through private corporations, and it comes right back to the United States in the form of campaign contributions or contracts by family members. President Biden has his brother, has his son over there working in Ukraine, and the money just flows back to them by the millions. And we could trace it if we wanted to, but when you're the party in power, you don't want to trace that money.
Right.
And by the time the next political party gains access to the power of Washington, all of those abilities to trace these finances will be erased. And I will make you a prediction sitting here today. Just like Saddam Hussein was propped up by us But when he was no longer useful to us, we had him killed. When Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, who was propped up by our country, was no longer useful to us, we had him killed. If I was Mr. Zelensky in Ukraine today, I would be looking over my shoulder, not for a Russian agent to pull the trigger, but for an American to pull the trigger. Because the day will come he's no longer useful to us, or he knows too much and we don't want him to talk. That's where we're headed.
So how does that tie with what we're doing or what we're dealing with politically to Israel right now? Or how does what's happening in Israel tie to what you just mentioned politically?
Apparently, Mr. Netanyahu can't be bought by American politicians. That's why there's so much friction and tension. Netanyahu has his convictions. He is a very intelligent man, very high IQ. He loves his country, and he does see a godly role for himself as being the current leader of Israel. He knows he won't be there forever, but he's going to do the best he can while he can. He's not wishy-washy. A lot of people in this country thinks he flip-flops. He's not. We're tying his hands. I want to give you an example of how we tie his hands. We only sell them F-35s, our jet aircraft that is stealth. They've got more F-35s than what they need, but it's a good thing. But what good is an F-35 if you don't have the special ammunition or bombs that are stealth-oriented that's specifically designed for that aircraft if we won't ship it to them? You can't go to France and buy it. You can't go to England. You can't go to India and buy this stuff. This is designed by us, built by us for that plane. So now they're having to revert to F-15s, F-16s, F-18s, where there's a universal amount of bombs, but none of those planes are stealth. So it compromises their mission. It makes them rethink their strategy, and Netanyahu has to shelve his plans to be able to work with what he's got. So that's how the Biden administration is tying his hands. And it makes him look wishy-washy.
So strictly with military aid. That's how they're tying military aid. So,
Yeah.
and it might not be a fair assessment. I'm going to just kind of make an assumption, I guess, off of what you've just said, but I think it would make sense. Ukraine, Zelensky, everything you've seen there, and I believe we mentioned before, previously in the interview where you said, find one politician who has told the Ukrainians to cease fire with the Russian situation.
Not one.
Not a single one. Yet a lot of them are screaming ceasefire with the Israeli situation. You're now saying, hey, we've sent stuff and we've dumped all kinds of military aid into Ukraine, which is a losing battle. We already know it is, just strictly by the numbers, right? Ukraine is a loss. We know it's going to be a loss. I guess, is the reason that we continue to support that over maybe in Israel? You're saying we're limiting what we send to Israel for military aid. Again, I'm not even talking about boots on the ground. I'm not for sending, because I've been in this situation, sending American soldiers, me going and fighting and dying for a war that my wife and my daughters know nothing about. I'm not saying that we're doing that. I'm just saying just strictly military aid. We don't send it to Israel. We do send it to Ukraine, in short, right? Is that because of the relationship that you mentioned with many politicians that we have here in the U.S. and a place like Ukraine, whether it's washing money or whether it's, hey, these guys know the nefarious intent, we're going to keep this going as long as we have, and Israel doesn't do that for us, and so therefore there's not the desire, the need to support Israel in that manner?
Ukraine and Israel are two different animals. The only thing that's a link is our relationship with them. I do believe, from what I've been told and what I've learned, that we were doing things in Ukraine that we didn't want the Russians to know about, and this war is covering up our ability to dismantle those things and get rid of them. Also, I believe that we're pinging the system. Now, what do I mean by that? We're trying to find out just how much of a conventional war the Russians are able to fight in Ukraine. So notice there's been no ICBMs exchanged. There's no heavy ballistics that's been exchanged. Mostly a ground warfare, tanks involved, artillery involved. But we've come to find out that at that lower level of conventional warfare, Russia's not capable of sustaining a long-term war. This thing should have been over in 30 days. It should have long been since over. Now, so there's a big gap in Russia's military capability. They can fight a conventional war, but not successful, but they're heavy on the nuke side, and that's what concerns us.
How heavy on the nuke side? Like,
well, would it surprise you to tell you we probably have 20 Russian nuclear submarines surrounding our country today in international water, that we really don't have to worry about Russian ICBMs flying from Siberia over the North Pole and Canada to hit us?
yeah, they shoot them from the Gulf.
They shoot them from the Gulf. They're off the Dominican Republic. They're out near Bermuda. They're off the coast of California. That's where the next war is going to be fought between us and Russia, if that war's ever fought. So we see that dynamic, and we want to change the dynamic in the Middle East. So we funnel submarines to Israel. Israel probably has the only submarine fleet in the Middle East to surround their Arab neighbors, because Israel is important to us. They're the only democracy in the Middle East. They have the only moral agenda comparable to us. But there are people in Congress and in the Senate who are God-fearing men and women who know their Bible, and they know the obligation of, I will bless them that will bless you, and I will curse them that curse you. And though they may not say that in the well of the Senate or the floor of the House, it's in their mind, it's in their heart, and they are going to protect Israel. Israel is the number one exporter of unique insulin products, of computer chips. The original Motorola phone was designed in Israel. That Motorola phone is what linked NASA to the moon. And we have Neil Armstrong's voice through a technological system that was invented in Israel, not in the United States. So we have a great linkage with them. We depend on each other for massive technology exchange. But at the end of the day, you still have American politicians who want to control that government. Israel is very mad at us. And they will tell you today that we're not the 51st star on your flag. And they keep reminding us of that. That's why I personally believe we need Donald Trump in office. If it's not Donald Trump, we need a very conservative, constitutional Republican in office who understands that dynamic. We need to clean house in the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
just the bureaucracy itself.
Yeah, we need to get the liberals out.
Yeah.
We need to get the liberals out of the State Department. That thing needs to be scaled back dramatically. We need to clear house in the FBI, the CIA, everything that has been touched with corruption that's compromising our national security. We need to clean house. And the Israelis are trying to help us do that. We just have the wrong people in power today.
Tell you, the wrong people in power to allow them to help clean house.
Yeah. Israel wants to help us, and there's people in this country that want to help Israel.
So that's a good, kind of offshoot into a couple of things I want to cover or I want to ask. But before we get too deep into them, you've mentioned Scripture a few times. We've talked about, the wars that will surround Israel at the end time. Can you give us how it ties to Scripture, especially for the Christian listeners that we have or Christian viewers? How does this tie to scripturally to those wars that we see in the end time? Obviously, at any point in time, the Lord can come back. We know that. But we will be able to see things that will let us know that it's being prepared. Like, hey, we're in this moment. What scripturally does what we see going on right now with Egypt, Iran, all of that, what scripturally can you say about that, or how does all this tie to us scripturally as Christians?
Okay. Well, I can tell you that the Jewish people who are very devout in their belief take their scriptures and they look at them and they study them, and they do realize that God has a plan for end time events. Any evangelical theologian who is astute in their studies and they can compare Old Testament scripture and New Testament scripture, if we take the religiousness out of it and we just look at it as a battle plan, we see that God's got a plan. There's going to be a battle. So, for instance, number one, in 3 different passages in the Old Testament, it specifically tells us that Damascus will be destroyed and not inhabited again. Many times in the last year, Israel's dropped bombs all over Damascus. Something is going on there with the Iranians, with the Syrians, and with the Russians, that they're using Damascus as a hub for military complex structures and planning and scheming. So I fully expect to see the Israelis destroy Damascus. That will fulfill Bible prophecy, but that's also a part of a strategic battle plan. The second thing
and right now, what's happening in Damascus that affects maybe what we see going on or somehow has an impact on it is the partnership, for lack of a better word, of the Russians and the Iranians in Damascus.
Yeah, well, they have missile depots there. They have missile batteries there. They have fuel depots underground at the airport around Damascus. Many of their radar array systems are all around Damascus. Syria tried to build a nuclear power plant just outside of Damascus. Israel bombed that several years ago, and they're trying to rebuild that again. Russia's back over there again trying to do that. But it has become like a command and control center for all of the operations in Syria and Iraq for the Iranians and for Russia. It is in Israel and in our best interest to take Damascus out. I would not be surprised, Jared, if you do not hear Israel give a speech, go on TV, and tell the countries of the world. And now it may happen privately, maybe a private phone call to the embassies or whatever. But tell the people, the business workers, the contractors, the embassy workers, to get out of Damascus, to flee, and give them 24 or 48 hours. If they will annihilate Damascus, then you've got these renegade bases in western Syria going over toward Iraq, which we can eliminate in a day. But currently, Damascus is a problem.
Got you. Okay, sorry, I cut you off as you're going
fine.
to this end, but that's the first thing, Damascus.
The second thing will be, we go to the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel's interpretation. It's a composition of world domination over what we call the time of the Gentiles. The time of the Gentiles started when God started punishing Israel for their idolatry and allowed Nebuchadnezzar to come in, destroy Jerusalem, destroy the temple, and capture the Jews, to take them back into Babylon in captivity for a period of 70 years. But also within that 70-year period, he told them that there would be 490 years of complete judgment. Now, so the 70-year period takes us from Babylonian captivity, the head of gold on Nebuchadnezzar's statue, to the chest of silver, 2 arms, Mede Persian Empire. Today we call that Iran. All right, so Babylon, Iraq, Mede Persia, Iran, and then the waist of gold is Greece or Eastern Europe, and then the legs of iron is Western Europe, Roman Empire. And we're still in the offshoots of that Roman Empire today. Rome was never conquered by another kingdom to take its place. We follow the legs of that Roman statue, that iron statue, down to the feet of iron and clay that's destroyed by Jesus and his kingdom that is to come. Biblically, we call that the millennial kingdom. So we're still living in the era of the times of the Gentiles in the Roman Empire. A little side note, go throughout the world and look at how many national flags has an eagle on that flag, or how much of their money, their coinage, or their paper bills has an eagle on the back of that.
Piles of them. They go all the way back to the Roman Empire.
So the eagle was their standard. So we're still an offshoot of that. So what I believe that what we're seeing happening is this. Between President Bush 41 and President Bush 43, we saw the destruction of the head of gold, Iraq. We're working our way back down the statue again. And now we're dealing with Iran, that chest of silver. And Iran will be destroyed because the next phase of this is Eastern European countries and Western European countries coming together, turning against Israel in the last days. And that has been prophesied, and God's word is true. It's going to happen as sure as you and I are sitting in this room. So do I believe that Iran is going to be destroyed? Absolutely. Does it mean it has to be completely destroyed, everybody die? No. But degraded to the point that they are no longer a world power. I want you to think back 20, 30 years. Do you remember the Iranian War?
Mm-hmm.
I remember they were all wearing keys around their neck, thinking that if they die, they're going to get into heaven. That was the key to heaven. And we actually financed both sides of that war to let them fight each other and keep them occupied with each other. We never anticipated that Iraq would be denigrated to the point that eventually we would destroy it. And now look what Iraq is. It's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's occupied by foreign powers, foreign enemies, terrorists, Islamic extremists. There's no more civilian government in Iraq.
Iraq is destroyed, even though when you think of destroyed, people are not wiped out completely, but Iraq, as we knew Iraq, is gone.
It's gone.
Yeah.
The same thing will happen with Iran. It's going to happen. The Persian people are great people. Not all of the Persian people, Iranian people, are Muslim extremists. They're not. There's some wonderful people there. But their country, militarily and politically, is going to be destroyed. That's the second step. And we're living in that day now. The next phase will be going into the Eastern European countries, turning their back on Israel, and the Western European countries.
And that's the legs of iron.
That's the legs of iron.
Yeah.
That's going to be very religious. It's going to be a very religious war at first. The European church is going to turn its back on Israel. I can tell you today that the people in Ireland are very anti-Semitic without cause. There's no reason for it, but it's doctrinally based. Israel and Ireland have never had a problem politically, but the Irish people cannot stand the Israelis. But it's all based on their theology. This may be offensive to some, but there are Protestant religions and mainline Catholic theology, Vatican I, Vatican II, that says the Jewish people have no right to be in Israel. It does
Is this
not belong
based
to
in
them.
replacement theology, I guess? Or
Yeah, it's replacement theology. It's a part of Reformed theology. The problem we have as an evangelical church is when we go to Israel to have a relationship with them, we have to take time to explain to them the difference. Reformed theology and replacement theology are two different things. They don't understand that.
Oh, I got you.
You and I may understand it in great detail.
But the Israelis don't.
They don't. They see a Christian. Matter of fact, they don't know the difference between a Protestant and a Catholic. It took me years to win favor with certain elements within Israel when they learned that, hey, there's a difference between Protestants and Catholics, between Reformed and replacement. And, open up the book of Romans, which is going to be a very controversial subject probably for everybody watching this broadcast. But, the Apostle Paul said in Romans, and all Israel shall be saved. He didn't say half. He didn't say a third. He didn't say a remnant. He said all. And this is the Holy Spirit speaking through the Apostle Paul. There's a verse in Isaiah and in Ezekiel. It's very important. Too many Christians think that because they can read a scripture in 30 seconds, that God is going to make this happen all at one time. But God is a God of a process. And Jared, me and you have lived long enough to see how things take place over time. There's a process of time that things happen. So God told Israel, I'm going to scatter you among the nations. That happened. It happened with the Babylonian invasion. They all did not come back. Jews scattered throughout Europe. They scattered throughout Morocco, the coast of Africa. Not all of them came back home to Israel when Cyrus the Great let them go back home 70 years later. And then when Titus destroyed Jerusalem and Israel in AD 70, and then when Hadrian comes along, and this will lead us to the Palestinians in a minute, or the word Palestine, when Hadrian comes along, he destroys everything. Not one building is left standing. Nothing. Those people were not left alive. They killed all the Jewish women and children. They took the men as slaves. They scattered them across Europe to build their bridges, their highways. We joke, all roads lead to Rome. That's true. And a Jewish slave helped build it. He finally takes them to England because he couldn't defeat the Scottish. Hadrian, this great Roman warrior, the Scottish people were just so mean. They were such tremendous warriors. He couldn't defeat them. So he builds Hadrian's Wall from one end of England to the other to separate Britain from Scotland. It's called Hadrian's Wall, and he built it with Jewish slaves. When he leaves, and when Constantine later leaves, all those Jewish people are left behind in Israel. That's why there's so many Jewish descendants in England. That's why there's so many Jewish descendants there in England and Scotland. But we come back and we see a religious war is going to happen, religious-based, not the church with weapons, but with words. It's going to be very anti-Semitic. It's happening now.
We're already seeing it happening now.
Oh, it's happening now. We're sponsoring an event to honor Israel in a few weeks. We've posted that on Facebook and other places. I cannot tell you how much hate I've already received talking about Israeli genocide, Palestinian murderers. You've killed all these Palestinians. How can you support such a people? So it's here, and it's coming from the church.
I heard that when I came back from some of my buddies that I don't fully agree with, but in more of the Reformed, there'd be Reformed theology. They're not Catholics. They come from the same, at least, background that we do.
Yes.
But they were asking their question. They're like, I don't know if I trust the Israeli government because of the genocide I seen and all that. And I laughed and I said, have you been there to see what actually happened? Because if you haven't been, you're living out Proverbs 19:2, zeal without knowledge causes you to miss the mark.
Yeah, it does.
There's nothing wrong with being zealous for righteousness if innocent people are harmed. But the only place where we see innocent people being harmed, at least in what we're seeing now, was what happened on October 7th with the Israelis, and what's continued to happen, but not at the hand of the Israelis. I can tell you, I've personally witnessed that with being there. It's what's happening at the hand of the Israelis because they're at war. They're trying to rat out the enemy. It's the simple fact that the enemy is using innocents as their targets and as their shields, whereas the Israelis are using themselves as targets and shields to innocent people, not just the Israelites, the Hebrew people in Israel, but also the Palestinians. They're at least making an effort that oftentimes is very hard to make in wartime to keep from injuring or harming innocent lives, and a lot of times innocent lives of the Palestinians who just are caught in the crossfire.
I have a buddy in the IDF that explains it this way. The Arabs will fight you in Gaza. They will fight you with a woman and child in front of them with their rifle laid over their shoulders.
That's right.
The Israelis will fight you with the women and children behind them, protecting them from the bullets that's coming.
We've seen that we saw that as a U.S. military in Iraq and Afghanistan, anywhere we've gone in the Middle East. That's what we've seen. They use children, they use women, they use old people, they use mentally unstable people or whatever to do things because their care for life or their care for innocent life, whether it's an adult who's got something wrong mentally, a child, an older person, a woman, their care for life is different than ours and is different than the Israelis. Like you said, a democracy, a democratic republic, some sort of society like what we have or like what the Israelites have, their care and their concern for life is far less than our care and concern for life as Americans.
Okay, well, I think people need to understand where the word Palestinian came from, where the word Palestine came from, how it's been propagated in the Christian world and adopted by the Arab world. We need to go back to around the year 120. Israel was always a problem for Rome. They had Pilate. They appointed the Herods. They actually had bought off what we call the Sadducees so that they would run part of the temple just to keep peace in Jerusalem. The Rome saw Israel as a strategic point, a land bridge between Europe, Asia, and Africa. So they wanted to control it. Herod was a very smart man. Herod had the first seaport built in the Mediterranean Ocean, so he could control trade and commerce coming through the Middle East. So Rome was picking up on this. This is a good place. But the Jews got out of hand. They didn't like Roman rule. They did not like to be slaves. In AD 70, Israel was completely destroyed. The temple was destroyed primarily, and Jerusalem. But they grew back. They became a problem again. Hadrian, which would eventually become one of the most important emperors of Rome, thought he was God. He thought he was God on earth. He had just gone up to Lebanon in a place called Baalbek and built this tremendous temple structure to Jupiter and Mars and Venus, and he put himself in the center of it. And while he was up there, he got word that the Israelis, the Jews, are causing trouble again. Well, he had had enough. So he marches thousands upon thousands of soldiers. He surrounds Jerusalem. He destroys the city. Jared, he doesn't leave one stone upon another, not just temple, because the temple's already gone. It's been gone 50 years. He destroyed every house. He burned every palm tree. Everything that could be burned, he burned. He killed everybody he could kill, and only the strongest survived to become slaves. And then Hadrian decides that he is going to make an example out of the Jewish people and out of Jerusalem. So he expands the Temple Mount platform, a large landfill project. He fills in the Temple Mount. He levels it off like we see it today. What we see today did not exist in the time of Christ. Completely different.
This is all about 100 years after Christ's death, correct?
Yeah, about 100 years. Jesus died in AD 30. Now we're looking at AD 120,
right.
So 90 years later. So he levels off the Temple Mount. He builds this tremendous temple to Jupiter, to Venus, to Dionysus. He has all these temple complexes up there. And to add the ultimate insult to the Jewish people, he says, who was the number one enemy of the Jews? They were the Philistines. And the Philistines, if you say it in the Latin term, it translates over into what we now call Philistia, and in English, Palestine. So he names Jerusalem Capitolina Philistia, or Philistia Capitolina, or the capital of the Philistines. Ultimate insult to the Jewish people. Now, that exists for another couple of hundred years, and it's in Roman writings. Romans were great record keepers. So this is a part of Roman record. But after about 200 years, you get into 350, Constantine has come in. He's now the supposed Christian leader of the Roman Empire. He calls it Jerusalem again. He renames it. That name of Philistia or Palestine that Hadrian gave to it is only embedded in an ancient Roman record. And then you get to the year 600, and in the 600s, the Muslims begin their war, trying to take over Israel. They have a nickname for it, El-Quds. Nowhere in the Quran is the word Jerusalem ever mentioned. And nowhere in the Quran is the word Palestine or Philistia ever mentioned, especially Muhammad's army that goes in. Interesting point. Muhammad never stepped foot in Jerusalem. He died 30 years before his army invaded. So now we have Muslim control from the year 600 or so, 650, let's say, all the way up to the year 1000. Now, this millennial idea of fever pitch has taken over Europe. The Muslims are invading Spain, France, the southern coast of the Mediterranean. And the church, though, the Catholic Church at that time says, hey, we're at the year 1000. Maybe this is the year that Christ is going to return. We need to purge the world of this Muslim influence. So they start waging war in Spain and what we now call Portugal, in Italy and Greece, and they work their way around the coastline of the Mediterranean. And we have the first crusade taking place around the year 1099 in Israel. But then it's called Jerusalem. It's not called Palestine. And for 400 years, it's still Jerusalem. And then later on, the Ottoman Turks in the year 1400 take over the Middle East, and they call it Jerusalem. They know it as the land of Israel, but they're taking over that land, and they rule that land from 1400 until the 1800s. And then the British come in, and they defeat the Ottoman Turks. And they have what is called the British Mandate. The French defeat the area that we now call Syria, and they had the Syrian or the French Mandate. And jointly, they're controlling Egypt, Jordan, the country we now call Jordan, Israel, and Iraq. And the French and the British are in control of the Middle East. And they're actually fighting each other over who's going to control what. Way before we knew anything about oil, or gold or silver. It was just land to them.
And this is in the 1800s.
In the 1800s.
Not long after our nation became a nation. That's why the French and the English were at each other. Is that correct? At that time, that's primarily because of that.
Yeah, absolutely because of that. So they're dividing up the land. Syria is French territory. What we now call Israel is British territory, under the British Mandate. Now, because of British English religion, the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, the Episcopal Church, and what we would eventually learn to call as the Lutheran Church, they have gone back to Roman records, and they call this area Palestine. So for the first time since AD 120, all the way up into the 1800s, we now have it called Palestine again. For the first time in history, we have the word Palestine printed into a British version of the Bible. Nobody else in the world is doing this but the British. So they have the British Mandate. And that British Mandate, if you was to look at a map, and you can go to Google, anybody watching this broadcast can look up British Mandate, and what land Israel was supposed to receive as a part of this new mandate. Lord Balfour, the Balfour Declaration, and other people were looking over the land. They go in and they draw a map where Israel is going to start in the Negev desert, and everything that we see today that is Israel, West Bank, and Gaza was all Israeli. Goes all the way up to Damascus, Syria, and half of the country of Jordan was going to be Israel. The French and the British start fighting about that. At that time, it was estimated by some American authors and people who had visited the area that we now call Israel. At that time, the British intentionally called Palestine. It was estimated that there were only 10,000 Arabs living in the country of Israel. Mark Twain even wrote, "This country is destitute. It's not worth doing anything with. This is horrible." And he noted there were very few Arabs or Jews living in the land. So through a series of events, a lot of controversy, then World War I breaks out. And we're fighting. And we're fighting the Turks again over Israel, over Syria. And the French are fighting, the British are fighting. The maps get redrawn. So no longer is Israel getting the entire British mandate, which would have included current-day Israel and current-day Jordan. That was the plan, to give all of that to Israel as a nation. And nobody in church is being taught that today. But that's a part of history, American history and British history and world history. There are maps that prove it. Everything that's Israel, everything that is Jordan was supposed to belong to Israel. So then the British draw a line down the Jordan River, and they call everything to the right Transjordan. And they tell all the Arabs, move. You go to Transjordan, that's your country. We will set you up a capital, a government, an economy, a kingdom. Jews, you can come home. This is going to be your land.
And this is after World War I?
This is after World War I. So they keep fighting. They keep arguing. The mullahs, the people in charge of the Islamic faith, they have in their Quran a text that says that Muhammad left on a horse from Mecca and went into the heavens and landed in the farthest place. And then he went back to heaven and returned to Mecca. But the word farthest place is never, ever described as where that was. He just went to the farthest place. But now these Arabs, realizing that they are about to lose control of Jerusalem again, take out their Quran and tell their British leaders that this was Jerusalem, that this belongs to us. So now they're carving up the Middle East again, and they name it Palestine. So the word Palestine was created by the British Church and the British government and was placed on all their maps. It even made its way into American Bibles, into American theology. And we wrongfully say that there's a Palestinian covenant in the Bible, which is not true. Now, Jared, I want to give you some facts. There is no such thing as a Palestinian. There is no Palestinian DNA. There are no Palestinian genetics. You cannot separate the Arab people from the Palestinians through doing a DNA test or a genetic code. The Palestinians are just as much Arabs as the Saudi Arabians, as the Jordanians. They are Arabs. There's no such thing as a Palestinian. If you put a bulldozer or a shovel into the dirt in Israel, you can find Canaanite culture, and you can find Philistine culture and Hittite culture, and you can find ancient Jewish culture going back 3,800 years. As a matter of fact, you can find traces of Abrahamic culture, the people who moved from Ur of Chaldees to Haran to Israel. You can find remnants. I have a bowl as a cup in my office. It's been dated 5,000 years old. It came from Beersheba, where Abraham lived. Okay, we can dig in the dirt and find pottery and arrowheads and spear points and swords and remnants of every culture. We can find language and writings of every culture, but none of that exists for a group of people that we call Palestinians. It's a sham, it's fake, it's fraud, it's phony. It is not real. It is not scriptural. It's not true. There is no such thing as a Palestinian people.
They're either Arab or they're not.
They're either Arab or they're not. Now, here's where we make a mistake politically. Even Israel, when they continue to call them Palestinians, all the other 40 million Arabs that surround Israel wash their hands of it. So that's not us. That's those Palestinians. Mm-hmm. We didn't do that. They did. You know, that's not a part of, we're not them. They're a different group of people. But it's not true. Genetically, they're the same thing as an Arab in Saudi Arabia. And the day that this government stops saying Palestinian and Palestine, the day that Israel stops saying Palestinian and Palestine, then the Arabs have to own up to who those people really are. It's them. It's a part of who they are. They're Arab, they're Muslims. And at the end of the day, their religion teaches one of two things: that they're going to kill everybody that is a non-believer, and then their Mahdi, Messiah, comes, or their Messiah comes and they kill everybody that's not a Muslim. There is no in-between with them.
Right.
And that's the reality of the real religious world that we're in. So anybody that's in Christianity that says Palestinian genocide, or these are Palestinians, or this is their land, that is not true. I can take you to the scripture and show you where God told Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob the borders of their land and where it will go. I can take you to the book of Deuteronomy and show you 3 separate passages where God is telling Moses, and your descendants will inherit these lands. Oh, it goes all the way to Damascus, Syria, to Amman, Jordan. It goes down to the Nile River, the land of Goshen, to the Red Sea. All of this is supposed to be Israel. Now, when David comes along, he conquers about 2/3 of that. When Solomon sits on the throne, he rules over all of that. And biblical maps will show you what Israel used to look like. Not even close to what we have today. So I guess to wrap this up, politically, the world needs to know there's no such thing as a Palestinian. Religiously, the church needs to come to grips with true theology. There is no such thing as a Palestinian. This is a lie that has been pushed on the world to separate those people from the Arabs, to keep the Arabs looking like the good guys and the Palestinians are the bad guys or the abused guys, whatever you want to call them, to isolate a problem. And that's why there will never be a 2-state solution. That's why it will never work. And you've just seen that's why it won't work, because look what happened just from Gaza, 5 miles wide and 26 miles long. And inside of Gaza, 5 million people crammed in that little territory. And look what they did to Israel. Anybody that says we need a 2-state solution is insane. You are signing the death sentence for every Jew in Israel. 2 states will never work.
Yeah. It's either you have it or you don't. There's not an in between.
No, there's not an in between.
So back on to what we were talking about beforehand, we've got the three things. One, Damascus. Two, if I can remember right, the church. You have the replacement and reformed. And then the third thing that we were going to cover that we didn't quite get into, what was that?
Okay, the battle plan in the Bible, number one is the destruction of Damascus. That has got to happen. Number two, we're going to follow the times of the Gentiles, Babylonian Empire, Iraq, Mede-Persian Empire, Iran, the Grecian Empire, Eastern Europe, the Roman Empire, Western Europe. We're following that statue back down to the end again. So that's battle plan number two, and we need to be mindful of that. That's how God's working, so we need to partner with the plan of God. All right, the third battle is described in Ezekiel 38 and 39. But let us go back to Ezekiel 36, 37. You have to put this in context. So every politician needs to read their Bible. Every pastor, every person that claims to be a Christian needs to read this. Chapter 36 is Israel being dispersed, being judged. Chapter 37, God says, I am going to redeem you from the nations of the world for my name's sake. Not that you deserve it, but I gave you a covenant. I gave you a promise. This land is yours. Very specific wording in Ezekiel 37. And he says, I'm going to bring you back into the land, and you will never be removed again. Then it says, I will wash you spiritually. I'm going to wash you. I'm going to restore you back to your Jewishness. Then Christians have a problem with this because we think, hey, man, they need to be born again. They need to receive Christ. That's not what God said. He said, I'm bringing them back into the land first. And then I'm going to restore them as a people who they are as Jews. And then he said, I'm going to take out of them a heart of stone and put into them a heart of flesh.
That partial hardening that the Jews are under, yeah.
And then he said, I'm going to put within you a new spirit, a spirit that will seek me with all of your heart. And then he promises them one more time, once I put you back in the land, you will never be removed again until I return. And then we have the valley of dry bones. And we read about that all the time, you know, the foot bone connected to the ankle bone. We have the valley of dry bones and the prophet being told, can these bones live again? And yes, that's the nation being reborn in 1948. In the month of May, we'll celebrate their birth date again here just in a few weeks. So the dry bones coming alive is Israel being reborn in the last days. The very next chapter is Ezekiel 38, 39. And there are a list of countries listed in both Ezekiel 38 and in Ezekiel 39. And one of those countries is the main country to the north. And then it gives the names of all the other countries like Tarshish and Gomer and Togarmah. And if you look at the list of countries in Ezekiel 38 and in Ezekiel 39, every one of those countries today are Muslim. They are Muslim-controlled countries. The country to the north, the furthest to the north, you draw a straight line from Jerusalem and go straight north, is Moscow. Now, he gives us a clue that it's Russia. They do something and have done something over the last hundreds of years that no other country on earth has ever done. The Bible talks about God's going to destroy them, the horse and the rider. Mm-hmm. He also says, I'm going to put a hook in your mouth and turn you back upon the mountains of Jerusalem and Judea. Well, why did God say hook? There's a reason for that. In America and in Europe, England, France, we put a bit in a horse's mouth, a part of the bridle. There's this soft, round bit, and we train the horse. We don't injure the horse, but we put a bit in his mouth and we teach him to turn with the pressure. But the Russians, the Cossacks, the warriors on horses, they had iron hooks that they put in the horse's mouth. And with intense pain, they would make them turn sharply and quickly. They put a hook in the mouth of the horse. Only the Russians did this. No one else on earth ever did this. So the Bible is giving us a clue. The kingdom to the north, the furthest place in the north, putting a hook in their mouth. And God said in the last days, he's going to bring Russia, and Russia's already in Syria. They have troops today on the Syrian-Israeli border. Russia and all of those Muslim countries that are listed in Ezekiel 38 and 39 are going to be directed under the power and influence of God Almighty to wage war on Israel. And then that gives God an excuse to intervene, and he says, I will destroy 5/6 of all of them. He decimates them all. He relegates them to insignificance. And then we have the future battle of what we call the tribulation period, which is completely different. We have future wars that we're not going to be a part of. I have a personal theology that I believe in the rapture of the church. I actually believe that the rapture of the church takes place and the world is decimated, all the Christians are removed. And that's why those Muslim nations see Israel as vulnerable. The world is in chaos. Christianity is gone. Who's going to stand up for Israel now? And that's why Ezekiel 38 and 39 takes place. That's the battlefield. So if I am a strategic planner, if I had the ultimate power in the American government or in the British government, I would be preparing my military and Israel's military to be ready for all of those countries that are listed in Ezekiel 38, 39. That's the battle plan of the Bible. God's not a man. He doesn't lie. It's going to happen just like he said.
Oh, that's great, man. And that's a perfect transition or segue into my final question that we talked a little bit about in the general overview, and that's that you tied all to Scripture, and I'm sure the listeners are going to enjoy it. And I encourage everybody that's listening or watching to get in your Scriptures, get in history, get in everything you can to study this on your own and see and understand, and especially if you're a Christian, let the Holy Spirit speak to you, right? Just like you were talking about. Let the Holy Spirit speak to you through His words and awaken you to what's going on around us. Because the bottom line is this is exactly what we're seeing. As you read Scripture, you are starting to see that wars and rumors of wars. When the Lord returns, He returns, but we're seeing the signs of the times. It says the men of Issachar were wise because they understood the times, talking about with David and knowing he was going to become king. And it's on us as Christians to be wise and be able to discern the times that we're in. So I think that's really powerful and hopefully good for the listeners and viewers.
And Jared, before we move on, I do want to say this, and this is not disrespectful toward anybody or toward any denomination. And I say this passionately as a Christian. Read your Bible for yourself. Don't buy the party line, because that's what leads us into unnecessary wars and bad theology. Be very careful that when you read the Bible, you read the text for what it says. If you don't understand it, do research. Find you knowledgeable men and women. Find you institutions. There's already been papers and documents written. But we have too many denominations that just because this is who we've always been, this is what we must believe.
Right.
And we're not going to change. But today's a different day. God is opening up the minds and the hearts and the spirits of men and women to know the truth. And I just want to challenge them, read the Bible, go back to the Bible, and fall in love with that Word of God all over again and see the message that He has for us.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you saying that. I get on to buddies all the time because many guys in my community and even in the church community, I'm talking about from the military, law enforcement, all that, they love reading what somebody else says about the Scripture as opposed to just reading the Scripture themselves and then reading other Scriptures. There's nothing wrong with talking and listening to and reading men and women who are more educated than I am on the subject, but I can't have any knowledge of it if I haven't first read it. If I want to get to know my wife, I don't talk with her parents who know her well, or her grandparents or her brother about her. I spend time with her.
Right.
And that's how I get to know her. They might know her better than I do initially, but heck, we've been married 15 years now. So now I know my wife better than anybody in her family does. And but it took me building that relationship with her. You want to have that relationship with God, understand His battle plan, and understand Him. You don't build that by studying and reading what somebody else says about God. You build that relationship by reading and hearing what God says about God.
Yeah. Jerry, me and you have talked about a lot of things that have to do with security and intelligence and national intelligence and foreign intelligence, but the greatest intelligence is between Genesis and Revelations.
Absolutely.
And the plan of the history of the world and the future of our world is already pre-printed in that text if we just take time to read it.
Absolutely. No, that's good. So that segues into us as Americans. Now, everybody that listens or watches might not be a Christian, right?
Right.
To this podcast. But how does this impact everything that's going on around the world? How does this impact us? I'm part of a contractor text thread, and a guy, buddy of mine, who's Aussie SAS, said in that thread, I believe it was an Aussie, but a lot of guys agreed with him. Other SEALs agreed with me in Green Berets. Like, hey, this is just what I try to do, raise my kids, do right. I'm not worried so much. I try to stay informed, but I'm not worried what's happening in Israel or Iran or, wherever, whatever's going on. This is after the attacks that were a few days ago. That's when he sent that out. And a lot of guys say, yeah, hey, this right here, we just want to grill out, hang out, and live our life and raise up, kids to be, decent members of society, Okay, I appreciate that, but this stuff does impact us, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you're a Jew or not, whether you live in the United States or you live in Israel. It impacts us all. This has worldwide repercussions, what's going on and what we've been talking about for the last 2 hours or so. How does this impact us in our everyday life? But more importantly, I guess, with what you've talked about earlier, the political piece that we run into here in the U.S., how does what's going on in these places and what's going on in our bureaucracy impact, let's say, what a guy like me, we call like a ground operator with an intelligence community or Department of Defense, Special Operations, whatever it is, we're on the ground working and we need certain things to get our job done. And we're also sending back certain information that we've gathered. And then you've got a politician in D.C. They're not on the ground, but they're making decisions that impact what's happening on the ground. And oftentimes, what we send out, they don't receive. I know this after talking with congressmen, being overseas doing stuff and then coming back. And when I actually let them know something, they're surprised, right? They're like, wait, that's not what we heard. This is what we heard. What's the problem we have? And you talked about a little bit of a reset in the U.S. government, that what's going on worldwide is starting to kind of expose or can expose with what's going on with our bureaucracy that's limiting or totally doing away with information dissemination back and forth between the politician making the decision and the individuals on the ground, your regular everyday people who are actually out doing the work of this nation.
If I could, let me start off with a quick history lesson, but which is very applicable to what we are facing today. And I'll keep the history lesson brief. The United States and France have always been joined at the hip, allies ever since 1776. And sometimes that relationship became very unhealthy because we would allow each other to do things that normally we would not allow another country to do. And America has been called colonial mentality nation. Well, so has France. And France, during World War II, conquered much of what we used to call Indochina, Southeast Asia. The Vietnamese people wanted to be free. The war is over. They were peace-loving people. They did their duty during World War II. And Ho Chi Minh wanted to be free. He called a rally together of all his people. He was the political leader of that day. Most of society and most of the people that's going to watch this podcast, what I'm about to tell you is going to blow them away. Ho Chi Minh stood up on a platform, hundreds of thousands of people at a soccer field, and he held up to them a copy of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. It's been videotaped. It was on camera. He read to them the Declaration, he read to them the Constitution, and he said, "Is this what you want to become?" And screaming and yelling, "Yes, yes, help us get there." So his first contact is with President Eisenhower. Eisenhower said, "Fantastic. What do we need to do?" Ho Chi Minh told Eisenhower, "Get the French out of our country. They're running our lives. They're making us slaves. They own everything that we have. If you can get the French out, we can run this ourselves. We don't even want you to come in and help us. You can teach us how. You can teach us to be a democratic republic. But you've got to get the French to leave." But we were so close to the French that we said nothing to them. And now we have the proof that a second letter was sent by Ho Chi Minh to Eisenhower, and it was intercepted by the CIA. A third letter was sent to Eisenhower, and it was intercepted by the CIA. So he didn't know. He thought they changed their mind. Situations in Indochina must have changed. Ho Chi Minh must have changed his mind. And then we get pulled into a French-Vietnamese war. That's how it started. And we're taking the side of our ally, France, that's telling us that the Vietnamese have turned on them. That wasn't true. Bad information, information that was manipulated to keep us at bay and to keep France in Vietnam. Now that's history. That really happened. So where are we today? Today we have 435 congressmen, we have 100 senators, we have a president, we have a State Department, we have all these people in different agencies from CIA to DIA, you name it, all the three-letter agencies that we have, NSA. And we as Americans want to believe that they have our best interest at heart and that they know everything that they need to know to make the right decision. But I have come to the personal conclusion, like many others have on their own, that the information from the field doesn't always reach the congressional desk or even the president's desk, and that there's people in the middle who actually think they not only run this country, but they think they run this world. And there are people who concern me greatly that are filtering the information and only allowing what serves their interest to get to the senators and to the congressmen and to the president. Would George Bush 43 have invaded Iraq? Just think about this. 9/11 takes place. Every single one of the hijackers are from Saudi Arabia, and we attack Baghdad. It makes no sense. Now, I'm not getting into conspiracy theory. I'm quoting to you history. Every one of the hijackers were Saudis, and we attacked Baghdad. We eliminate them. We didn't attack Saudi Arabia. Somewhere information that flows up, I've heard that many times from those three-letter agencies. Okay, we take this information and we'll flow it upstream. We'll see what happens. Well, sometimes it's hard for things to flow up. Okay, now a dead fish can flow downstream easy, but it takes a strong, vibrant fish to flow against the current. You have to make way. I'm concerned that we have people in government today that are filtering the information. You go on a job, you go on a mission, you've got boots on the ground and eyes on the field, and you see what's happening. and you report it up the chain of command, it gets all the way back to a congressman in Washington who has control of the purse strings.
Right.
That's going to supply you with the equipment, the ammunition, the military equipment that you need to do your job. But what if that communique is intercepted? What if that congressman and that senator is only told half the story? That's where we are today. That's the reality of the world that we're living in today. You want to talk about the Steele dossier to slander Donald Trump? And now we know every single word, comma, and period was a lie to destroy a man, to hinder the American government. Jared, I will tell you today that I don't watch the news anymore because I don't know what the truth and what the lie is. I get my truth from my buddies on the ground.
Right.
If I want to know what's really going on, I have a way of communicating with them, and I'll find the answer. I am very concerned, and I say this sincerely, I'm concerned for every congressman, Republican and Democrat. I'm concerned for every senator, Republican and Democrat, that they may have staff members who are filtering the reports that they get. They may have agencies at the government level that are scrubbing the reports that they receive.
That historically they should be able to trust, right? I mean, they should be able to, at least maybe not historically, maybe theoretically, they should be able to trust them, right?
That's what they're being paid for.
That's what they should be there for. And that's I guess that's the bureaucracy. When I say bureaucracy, that is it. Not the politician who can get voted in or get voted out. Those people who can't be touched, right? They're in that government system. They can't be touched. And it doesn't matter who gets voted in or voted out. They're still in the same position.
They're still
the
in the
bureaucracy.
same position.
And then the individuals on the ground. It's funny you mentioned that. That's where I get a lot of my information from, buddies on the ground, or I've actually been on the ground. And I sat in a hearing about, we got people out of Afghanistan when the shutdown happened after everybody left. And I remember sitting in a hearing on it, and people that should be way smarter than me, PhD people and folks that I think they work within the State Department. I got State Department buddies who are very high up who laugh at these Harvard-educated folks because they don't understand the reality of what the pullout was of Afghanistan. But they're saying things, and I'm texting my Congressman Gary Palmer. I'm just texting him pictures and texting me as he's sitting up there answering questions. Well, I know that's not true. How do you know it's not true? Because I was there. Here you go. And I sent him a picture. I had a buddy that was there and got this information. So you would say that is a valid, going all the way back to maybe at least the Vietnam War, if not beforehand, but definitely the Vietnam War era. That is a valid problem of, it might not be the agent or the operator, whoever is doing the work. It could be sometimes, but it might not be them as much, and it might not be the politician who's in there. And those are generally the two ends, either the pawn or the king that somebody's going after. It's that intermediary, I guess would be the word, or that intercessor in the bureaucracy that is just either holding information, providing incorrect information, or maybe a mixture of both to one or the other, the end user, the guy on the ground, or the end user, the politician who's making the decision.
And we've got to have 100% accurate information coming from the field to whatever agency provides it to our legislators so that they can make proper votes on the floor to fund or not to fund a program.
Certain things.
We need to not only know when to pull the trigger, but when not to pull the trigger.
Right.
Both are important. Let me give you a good example without using names because I don't want to jeopardize anybody. Recently, over the last 6-7 years, we had an ambassador sent to a country. This ambassador did something very unusual. He hired an individual to be his chief of staff. It made no sense. People were watching the story. Why is this ambassador, very good man, intelligent, integrity, everything that you would hope for in a political appointed position to be an ambassador to a country? And he hires a chief of staff. This chief of staff has no experience at all in government. But what this man had was a nonprofit organization in the United States. And what this man also had was dual citizenship in the United States and in this country that he was appointed to as chief of staff. And in this other country where he had dual citizenship, he also had the equivalent of a nonprofit organization. He was flowing money from the United States through his position of power and influence that he was given from people that had a political interest in this country to influence the politics of that country. And the ambassador never knew he was doing it. And the people in this other country where he was assigned, he was receiving tens of millions of dollars to flow through his organization to come back over here to this country to vote for very extreme liberal socialist politicians. And the alarms were raised, questions were raised on both countries, and nothing was ever done about that man. Now, when your intelligence community knows this is going on, and they know that the money is exchanging through this pipeline, and here you have this renegade chief of staff that has no political experience at all. If I told you what his experience was, you would laugh. He's appointed chief of staff to an ambassador, but he was a pipeline to affect the political outcome of two different countries to vote for individuals that I would have a hard time ever supporting. And nothing was ever done. He was shielded and he was protected by somebody in the middle, not by the congressman and not by the people in the other country, because both of those people, when they finally found out about it, it was too late. The man was out of his position and the damage was done. And today, as we sit in this room, we're living with the damage that that man did.
Wow.
So we need to have confidence in every level of government that actionable intelligence on the field makes it up to the congressmen and the senators that they know how to vote and they have the right information in front of them to make the proper decision. Today, I have no confidence that that's taking place 100% of the time. I don't.
Wow. And that's heavy. And so obviously with what's going on around the world, just simply the problem that we have that you just mentioned, what's going on around the world, Israel, Ukraine, Russia, whatever, that impacts us just simply because the bureaucracy allows it to impact us, whether it's beneficial form or if it's not beneficial form. That's what decides what they choose to do. And for us, when we look at it, we oftentimes, I ask people all the time, we want to always blame somebody else. I mean, that's kind of our culture. We want to blame somebody as opposed to looking at ourselves, which that's a scriptural principle. I need to look at the log in my eye before I try to get the speck out of yours, right? But as we look at it, what do? We all look at the politician over here, or we look at the partisan line, when in reality, it might not be the partisan line. It might not be the politician. It might be the bureaucracy that has limited the politician's knowledge or has lined the politician's pocket, right?
Right.
I think that's another, we've been using scripture the whole time. Another scriptural principle is a bribe perverts justice. You might have somebody that has a just heart or a just mind, but if a system is in place to where they can more easily be bribed, well, then it's going to pervert that justice, right?
It does. And very quickly, Jared, I could rattle off to you this. I know for a fact, as we sit here today, that in January, December of 23, January 24, the Israeli government was talking to officials in the American government about putting a military base in Gaza, or at least a seaport and a command and control center. Well, the three-letter agencies, people in those agencies that I personally know, laughed at that. That will never happen. And 2 weeks later, it's announced.
It's happening right now, yeah.
Okay. And did that report meet meet Congressman Palmer's desk? Did that meet Robert Adderholt's desk? I doubt it. Okay. Do they have on their desk today that Israel has already built the highway from Israel through Gaza to the
Gaza,
Mediterranean?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is it there? I can't tell you that it is. Do they know about the wall being built over ventilation shafts? I doubt they've seen that because it is not serving someone's best interest.
Right.
And we pay the price for that. We pay the taxes on that. Our sons and daughters die for that. We sacrifice intelligence, technology. All of these things impact our country. The truth will set us free. But man, we've got to have people in these positions of power telling the truth.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And we might not ever have that till the Lord comes back, but it sure would be nice to try to make it happen a little bit more often than it seems like it is.
Yeah, we got to try.
Yeah.
We've got to try. We've got to make this world better. It's up to us to do it and hopefully raise up the next generation that'll fight the same battle.
Man, that's great. Well, I thank you so much for, one, taking time to sit down with us twice now, right, on this interview that's roughly about 2 hours long. You know, I hope the listeners and the watchers, the viewers get something out of this as they listen to it. I think they will. I know I did. But one, as a Christian, and I encourage all Christians, and I know you're doing this, pray for Israel.
Amen.
As part of praying for Israel, you're hosting something at your church on May the 5th. Is that right?
Yeah, Sunday night, May the 5th, from 5:30 until 7, we're going to have a night to honor Israel. The purpose is to bring in pastors, civic leaders, and any Christian who wants to be a part of this meeting to let them see what is really taking place in Israel that is not making the news. We want them to see the truth. And then we want them to understand that there are needs in Israel that are not being met. And it's going to take Americans doing their part. Not the American government, but Americans.
American people.
American people that are going to have to take part, step up, and meet the goals and help in some way. Now, meetings like this are taking place all over the United States, and I commend everyone that's doing this. But we want to do our part. Meet at Kimberly, May the 5th, Sunday night, 5:30. We'll have about a 30-minute program of presenting to the audience the truth of what's going on in Israel. And then afterwards, we're going to have a meal and an auction. We're going to try to raise some money to help Israeli soldiers and to help Israeli families. There's two needs that are there. And I know we can't help everybody, but we're going to help somebody.
Absolutely. No,
We're going to help somebody.
That's great. So we have that going. So for anybody that's interested, we'll be sure to continue to put that out and make sure that everybody has the flyer. And,
Thank you.
And continue to pray for Israel. Pray for our country, as what's going on in Israel and Ukraine and Russia and all over the world is directly impacting what we do, whether we realize it or not. And then finally, we just need to pray that the Lord reveals himself to all the people that are left on this planet in a way that they can know him as you and I do as Christian brothers, because ultimately that's the most important thing. So
That is the thing that matters the most.
well, thank you so much for taking time to do this. And hopefully, and by the way, 2 days after we spoke last time, and we decided to put this on pause because 2 days after you said war is at the door or war is at the gate. What happened? Iran attacked Israel, like Iran itself attacked, not through a proxy or anything. And the Houthis took down a flag Portuguese vessel owned by Israeli financiers, and so we had all of that going on almost 2 days after you mentioned that.
Yeah,
So
and Jared, if you would suffer me just one more minute,
Yep.
I want to see if I can show you this. While we have been sitting here discussing this on this Tuesday, the 16th, I want to kind of timestamp this information for you. One of my contacts in Israel has just sent a message and said it has gone out nationwide that there will be a planned attack upon the Iranian regime. Everyone in Israel is being asked to store water, food, and gasoline, and Israel is preparing to strike Iran as soon as possible.
Wow.
So this is a nationwide alert. This comes from an extremely credible source, and they're telling the people of Israel to get ready, to be prepared.
Well, we'll definitely keep them in our prayers, and that's great to hear. That way everybody knows the timestamp, and maybe people will see in reality the difference in the information of the guys that's on the ground versus what is scrubbed from our media channels or our media sources and the politicians.
Absolutely.
So, well, we'll probably have you back on again to talk more about this. I could talk with you for like 3 days about all this stuff, but thank you for your time so far.
Thank you.
And look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Okay, God bless you, Jared.
You too, brother. Thank you, Stan.
A Fox News alert and breaking right now. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi and his foreign minister have been killed in a helicopter crash. Their deaths confirmed by Iranian state media overnight, triggering a massive response across the Middle East and around the world.
Now saying that 50 tunnels leading from Rafah, the southernmost city in Gaza, have been found, and they are leading over to Egypt. The Foundation for Defense of Democracy is reporting that Israeli attorney Gilad Noam told the International Court of Justice that nearly 700 tunnel shafts have been identified in Rafah, and about 50 of them cross into Egypt. Noam saying that Hamas uses the tunnels to supply itself with weapons and ammo and could even use them to smuggle hostages out of Gaza.